And welcome to another treatment of the International Sunday School lesson. Today's lesson is entitled Love and Serve God. And it's taken from Joshua, the 24th chapter, verses 1 through 3, verses 13 through 15, and verses 21 through 24. And it's for December the 9th, 2018, winter quarter, lesson number 3. Now, a little background information. We have progressed on in our storyline of the Bible to where this is after Joshua and the children of Israel had conquested a fair amount of the promised land. And this is toward the end of Joshua's life. And they are, he's wanting to get some commitment out of the children of Israel and to instruct them of how important it is to serve God and be totally committed to God. Okay? Now, 24th chapter, first verse. Joshua gathered all the tribes of Israel to Shechem and summoned the elders, the heads, the judges, and the officers of Israel, and they presented themselves before God. Now, this was basically where Joshua lived, Shechem. It was about 8 miles away from Shiloh, where the Ark of the Covenant was being held. And so Joshua, the Lord had directed him to call this meeting with the heads of the various tribes, the elders, the leaders of the people, and they all gathered around in Joshua's hometown of Shechem. Okay. A second verse. And Joshua said to all the people, "Thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, long ago your fathers lived beyond the Euphrates, Terah, the father of Abraham and of Nahor, and they served other gods." So Joshua was relaying something that the Lord wanted to reinforce to the children of Israel, that they were totally in darkness, they were given over to idolatry, and they had been suffering the consequences of that, when God reached down and called them out of that ignorance, that darkness, that blindness that they were in. And there are times where we need to be reminded of that same thing, of the condition that we were in when we were saved. When God reached down His hand and drew us into the light. And also, too, to be reminded that it would be easy to turn back into that darkness and to go back into that sin. And that's what God was saying through Joshua to the children of Israel. How that they could turn, they were in darkness originally, they were into idolatry originally, and they could turn right around and go right back into that if they're not careful. And they did. Repeatedly, they went back into idolatry. It wasn't until after the Babylonian captivity that the Jewish people completely gave up idolatry. Up until the Babylonian captivity, nearly every single generation, one after the other, had periods or had infection, had an infestation of idolatry, to where they were into witchcraft, where they were giving offerings up into idols. They were even giving in human sacrifice their children into idols. And that was a constant struggle for the children of Israel. So God wanted to let them know where they came from, and to point that out of where they came from, the darkness that they were in, and to underscore how easy it would be to turn back into that darkness. If you get somebody who has been an alcoholic and they get saved, there is no way in the world they need to be around a beer hall, a beer joint. There's no way in the world they should go inside of a beer joint. They're just playing with fire, because they are so used to that kind of thing. They could draw right back into that kind of lifestyle. So they need to remind themselves that's where they came from. And they need to be reminded that they need to avoid that. Someone who was into cavorting around and running around on their mate, they don't need to be sitting there flirting with somebody, because it would be easy for them to slip into that old lifestyle. Someone who was apt to be violent and smack people around, they don't need to be putting themselves into these contentious situations to where they would end up going back into that old lifestyle. Somebody who was apt to steal, was a bad thief before they got saved, they don't need to put themselves in the position, into the temptation of where it would be easy for them to steal something. We need to avoid those things that we had a weakness for. To remember where we came from. And I'll tell you something else too that's important for us to always remember, and was important for these children of Israel to remember, is to not think so much of ourselves, to not be arrogant and think so highly of ourselves, to remember where we were when God saved us. And it's only by the grace and mercy of God that we are changed. So, this is an important thing. It was important for them at this point in time, because they had started to have a good bit of success during the book of Joshua as they begin to settle in to the land of Canaan. Now, the book of Judges, on the other hand, they had a lot of difficulty in the book of Judges. They had a lot of success in the book of Joshua. And so it would have been easy for them to start getting prideful and thinking very highly of themselves. So at this point in time, God wanted to reinforce to them where they came from, the condition they were in originally, before God showed His mercy and His grace. Okay? Now, third verse. Then I took your father Abraham from beyond the river and led him through all the land of Canaan and made his offspring many. I gave him Isaac. And we see that, remembering back several weeks ago when we were talking about Abraham and Isaac, how that God in His infinite mercy had called Abraham out, called him out of that idolatry, and even though his advanced age of him and Sarah, how that God had promised him an heir and gave him Isaac, and they had a great relationship, and Abraham had shown faith and trust in God and believing what God had told him. And God miraculously, someone who had not had any children for all those years, and then suddenly this great multitude of people came forth from Abraham. And it wasn't just the children of Israel only, but the children of Ishmael were also born to Abraham, and they were also became a great and mighty people. So Abraham had a tremendous blessing that God had bestowed upon him. Okay? Now jumping down to the 13th verse, and this is where God through Joshua is letting the children of, pointing out the children of Israel, the blessings that God was giving them, not just their ancestors, but giving them. 13th verse, I gave you a land on which you had not labored, and cities that you had not built, and you dwell in them. You eat the fruit of vineyards and olive orchards that you did not plant. So God had given them that land, these cities, where they began to occupy these cities. And God, in His infinite wisdom, let them take that land over in a very progressive way, so the land was not overrun by wild animals and overrun by plants and forest. They were taking it over bits at a time. It was already cultivated, and the land was already worked, and there wasn't this time and period where the land was dormant and the wild animals took over and the forest took over. Okay? So everything, the timing was just perfect. And you'll find in your life, a lot of times God will do that kind of thing. Everything will be timed perfect. Just absolute, the exact time, and God lets things come through at the exact time that it should come through. Okay? Now the 14th verse. Now therefore, fear the Lord and serve Him in sincerity and in faithfulness. Put away the gods that your fathers served beyond the river and in Egypt, and serve the Lord. And if it is evil in your eyes to serve the Lord, choose this day whom you will serve, whether the gods your fathers served in the region beyond the river, or the gods of the Amorites in whose land you dwell. But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. Now, let me be real clear about this, and these are some of the most important verses in the Bible. and I believe that with all my heart, you have to serve somebody. You're either going to serve the world and the devil, or you're going to serve the Lord. There's no neutral ground in this. You have to make that choice. Now, you've got a free will. If you decide that you don't want to serve God, God's not going to force you to serve Him. You can go out, you can live any way you want to live. But there are consequences for doing that. You have to make a conscious decision who you are going to serve. And like I said, being neutral is not an option. And that's what these verses are talking about. That's the main theme of this lesson today. Is that you're either going to serve God or you're going to serve the devil. There is no middle ground. There's no indecision. There's no flip-flopping back and forth. You're either going to be a servant of God or you're going to be a servant of the devil. It is that simple. Choose this day who you are going to serve. Okay? Now jumping down to the 21st verse. And the Lord said to Joshua, and the people said to Joshua, and the people said to Joshua, no, but we will serve the Lord. Then Joshua said to the people, you are witnesses against yourself that you have chosen the Lord to serve Him. And they said, we are witnesses. Now, time and time again, in all types of church work, in all types of Christian ministry, you will run across people who are in maybe dire straits and things have just overcame them, and it's like maybe a financial problem or a health issue or whatever, and they make all kinds of promises to God. And sometimes they make those promises with absolutely no intention whatsoever of living up to them. But let me tell you something. In the plainest way I possibly can tell you is that you cannot make a trivial promise to God. Every promise you make to God is serious. Don't play games with God. He ain't just anybody. Don't sit there and promise Him everything you can think of with no intention of following through on it. Sit down, weigh the cost. Weigh the cost of what you're committing to. Make sure that in your heart of hearts you intend to live up to whatever you promise to God. It's not your lip service that makes any kind of difference. It's what you actually do that makes a difference. You will be judged by what you do. Do not make a promise to God with every intention of breaking it. Because He knows the future anyway. I mean, it is very stupid to sit there and make a promise to God with no intention of living up to it, like you're going to be able to con Him. He knows the future. He knows exactly what's going to happen. He can see right through you. He knows exactly what's in your heart. He knows what's in your heart better than you do. You are being a fool to make a promise to God that you do not intend to live up to. And there are consequences for doing that. Okay. Now, 23rd and 24th verse. And He said, "Then put away the foreign gods that are among you, and incline your heart to the Lord, the God of Israel." And the people said to Joshua, "The Lord our God we will serve, and His voice we will obey." Now, there might be some areas in the country where, people worship idolatry. But for the most part, in the continental United States, we don't have very much idolatry. We don't have very many idols. We've got some different religions and stuff like that, and those are idols. But for the most part, especially the people who are listening in the sound of my voice, it's highly doubtful that hardly any of y'all have a temptation to bow down to a molten, graven image. But you can have different types of idols that you worship. You could have an idol of money, and you could be worshiping money. Now, the thing about money, you'll hear people misquote that verse in the Bible as money is the root of all evil. Bible does not say that. It's the love of money that's the root of all evil. Okay? And you can be poor as a church mouse and love money and just worship money and always be in everything for yourself, and that can be your idol. People can have an idol of their physical gratification, and that can be their idol that they worship. Their physique could be the idol that they worship. They worship their body to where, all they think about is, exactly how beautiful they are and how healthy they are and whatever. And they can be worshiping that. You can worship your job. You can start a company and worship your company. You can have all kinds of idols. Nothing is supposed to come before God. Okay? Okay. Now, concluding thoughts, again, let's go back to, as I said earlier, the central theme of today's lesson is you got to serve somebody. Make your choice. If you're going to serve God, serve God. If you're going to serve the devil, you might as well go serve the devil. But you're going to serve somebody. There's no neutral ground. Okay? Well, friends, good Lord willing, I will be back with you next weekend.